Hi, Dennis Weiss for Eagle Communications. Today, welcoming you to Why Like Ike, and we're going to have a great day. Look behind me. We have the Battle of the Bulge. We have Troy Elkins and Jeff Nelson. And they're the experts today, but I have a pair of white gloves, which means I can touch stuff. So I'm so excited. So Troy, tell us what we're going to talk about today.
Today we're going to discuss the Battle of the Bulge and some of the unique artifacts that we have in the museum that come from that time. Battle of the Bulge started in December of 1944 and went all the way through January of 1945, and was the last dying gasp of the Nazi battle.
And quite a gasp it was.
Yes, it was.
Not a gentle outflow of breath, but it was a violent gasp of the German army through the heart of the Allied front.
Yes, it remains to this day the largest single battle the U.S. Army has ever fought.
You know, we have a lot of local people. Well, we don't have them anymore. We had them, maybe, is the correct way of saying that. But I've had the pleasure of meeting several that participated in and around the Battle of the Bulge, and they all had clear memories of it, I guess, is the way I would say that. So what have we got, and how important is it to the Battle of the Bulge?
Okay, well, I'll let Jeff start with the first big item.
All right,
Okay.
Jeff.
To my right here, we have a Panzer tanker jacket or tunic. This would have been worn by an SS Panzer tanker and an SS division. For the Battle of the Bulge, Adolf Hitler specifically picked his strongest remaining SS divisions to lead the battle and be kind of the spearhead, if you will, of the attack into the Allied lines. And so this would have been one of the jackets that would have been worn by the armored divisions. The Germans attacked with over 20 divisions, mix of armored and infantry divisions. The other large thing we have is this right here, which is a Sturmgewehr Model 44. It is technically a machine pistol or machine gun. The term Sturmgewehr means storm rifle, and in this case the word storm means to assault or take over.
Right.
So the Sturmgewehr 44 is actually the ancestor to all modern assault rifles. The Allies picked up that term.
One of the most rare armaments of World War II. There aren't many surviving. I'll never forget the day I saw this thing in the library for the first time. I was so excited. My son was so excited as well.
This rifle actually gave the Germans a fairly significant increase in rate of fire and firepower during the attacks, and it was found to work quite well in extreme cold, which worked out for the Germans in the Battle of the Bulge, since it was so cold that December and January.
The Battle of the Bulge, so much to say, I think, about the Battle of the Bulge. And I think of my son, 16. He's been interested in all of these things since he was little and has done a lot of research. Probably the most knowledgeable person I know about this period of time. But he would be quick to point out, if he were here, that the Panzers, the SG-44, both were premier weapons in the war. There were no better in their class.
Right.
The fact that the Allies, we could overcome them, were far more dependent on our ability to resupply our troops than it was the technical capabilities of the weapon. That's a poignant thought for America, who has lost a lot of our manufacturing power.
It is a poignant thought. For example, in the Battle of the Bulge, at the onset of the battle, the Germans had approximately 400,000 troops facing approximately 200,000 primarily U.S. troops in the Ardennes forest. A month and a half later, at the end of the battle, the Allies had managed to bump their troop numbers up to over 700,000, while the Germans were down to about 250,000. So even though the Germans did have highly technologically advanced weapons systems, they had a very difficult time getting them to the front in enough numbers to make a difference during the battle. One of the other items we have here is this memo that we pulled from our collection. It is from the Commanding General of the 101st Airborne, which, as you might know, held the city of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. And this memo is the Merry Christmas memo. It's quite an interesting memo. People might wonder what was so merry about being in Bastogne in Christmas of 1944. General McAuliffe, the commanding general, pointed out the fighting abilities of his men in the 101st and the men in the 10th Armored Division that were fighting with them. And he also made a specific point to put a German memo in this Christmas message. On December 22nd, the German general had sent him a message saying, "You are surrounded, you will be destroyed and defeated. Your only hope is surrender." General McAuliffe did not take that message too well, and he replied with one of the most famous messages in World War II. It was a single word, and that word was nuts. That message confused both the German High Command and actually the British High Command, and had to be explained to both what nuts meant.
The euphemism didn't translate well, but they figured it out pretty quick, didn't they?
That they did.
They did. And the 101st Airborne, to this day, they may have changed the word a little, but it means about the same thing. And that's, I'm sorry, we're never surrounded, and we have you right where we want you. Okay, so interesting artifacts. We'll pause here a minute, and because this is why, like Ike, and we always talk about Dwight David Eisenhower, the uniqueness of his presidency, the uniqueness of the man, the relevance, and there may be 5 people that watch this that are going to get this, but you and I are going to like this. All right, and my son will. So when Syria first fell apart in recent history, I was flipping through on my laptop the news stories, and I paused on this picture. I called my son and I said, "What is that man's carrying?" They had a cache of them somewhere. They were as new in the photograph. And a few days later, the news story came out, and so on and so forth. But that weapon had made its way into an ally of Germany at the time, and survived to this day, and is being used.
Still being used in conflict to this day, yes.
So, Dwight David Eisenhower, period of time, I'm always fascinated by the leadership teams that came out of World War II, and you look at the Battle of the Bulge, and gosh, they're just everywhere. Think about General Sykes, who was spent his retired years here in our community, in Junction City community. He was just over to the left on the Battle of Bulge, and he would talk about those days in absolute stark horror. All these years later, it was a terrible, terrible, terrible thing, as war is, but it was at the height of destruction, with 2 armies facing each other in dense woodlands and occupied cities. So, what else have we got?
Well, part of what we wanted to talk about was, you had mentioned the logistics, basically, which is one of my favorite things to always talk about, is logistics. At the time, the U.S. was struggling going into the Battle of the Bulge. The supply lines were just so long, traveling all the way across France. There was a lot of improvisation that took place to get troop supplies. But even though you still had a shortage of ammunition, shortage of fuel, shortage of food, and most of all, shortage of winter clothing. Well, for the longest part, the U.S. troops were living off of what they called K rations. And this is one of the older, was made towards the end of the war. This was manufactured by the Hills Brothers Corporation, which is known for their coffee.
Okay.
When the K rations originally came out, they were made by the same company that made Cracker Jacks, hence the reason they're in a Cracker Jack box, because it fit in there. This one was specially made. It's called the dinner one, which was what they considered lunch. It contained a pork patty substitute type meat, some caramels, some beverage powder, some crackers that are more like trying to chew on a brick and basically still subsist or survive in today's MREs as far as the crackers go. And more importantly, it had a small pack of 4 name brand cigarettes in there, just to keep you warm in the middle of the snow.
Yeah.
This was meant for a short time ration, but this is what our soldiers were living on day in and day out since they had landed in Normandy and fought their way across. And as a result, when they were getting wounded, a lot of guys were being treated for malnutrition, where this was a lot of calories. It lacked the vitamins and minerals, but you needed to stay healthy.
Sure.
This is also wanted to point out a Purple Heart. This is one of the many Purple Hearts we have in our inventory, and this actually was given to a gentleman by the name of Herbert Edgman, and I'm sorry I have to look at his name.
That's all right.
We have not been able to find any information on it. It was donated by one of his later relatives, and it's one of those ones that we have so much stuff coming in. We get all these artifacts in, and we want to know the story behind them, because yes, we know the Purple Heart, that means he was wounded at some point in time. And from what we were told, he was wounded in the Battle of the Bulge, but we want to know the story. We want to put a face and person with every one of these artifacts that we have. And that leads us to actually the last 2 items we have. Anybody that's watched MASH or anything kind of recognize a bottle of blood that would have been donated. And what's ironic about this is if you look at the date on it, name and date, is donated by Dwight D. Eisenhower on January 11th, 1945.
Wow. My goodness.
So when you consider the scope of the Battle of the Bulge, the fact that a newly appointed 5-star general is donating blood
Right.
to help out, that gives you a clue of how bad, how many wounded there are in the Allied lines.
That is something. That made an impression on me when you showed me the label. That's something.
Yeah, and this actually goes with it. This is a piece of shrapnel, and this was pulled out of Corporal Kenneth Johnson of the 12th 12th Engineer Combat Battalion. They were at the very south end of the Battle of the Bulge. They were actually through the Hürtgen Forest and in part of Germany, and they anchored the line. They were what was keeping the Germans from spreading the offensive. On January 17th, Corporal Johnson was hit by this shell fragment, and it severely wounded him. The doctor who performed the surgery removing the shrapnel also held on to the bottle of blood.
Isn't that something?
And sent that to us in early 2000s.
That's something.
Unfortunately, Corporal Johnson did not survive. He died a month later of his wounds. But this is what we like to have. I mean, it is a very somber artifact, and it has a way of telling us part of this history that we don't always get to make that connection to.
That is something that's really, really, really unique. You know, that piece of metal, I'm sure Dave got a pretty good shot of it, but it's simply a jagged fragment of a bombing device. These aren't smooth things that go through people's bodies, jagged, hot metal flying everywhere. And in particular in the Ardennes, the wood splinters were part of the shrapnel. The Germans shooting 88s, which are designed as an anti-aircraft gun, shooting them horizontally, and that really produced devastating shrapnel in the woods. Glad I wasn't there. Hey, I have a personal thing. It says on the side of your K ration, it says, notice, mosquito bites cause malaria. If you're in a malaria zone, keep your shirt on, your sleeves rolled down, use mosquito repellent when you're out of doors between sunset and sunrise. I have pictures of my dad, my Uncle Clayton, and my Uncle Tom. Uncle Clayton and Uncle Tom were in North Africa at the time of the pictures, and my dad was in New Guinea and the Philippines. Not only did they not have their shirt sleeves rolled down, didn't have a shirt on.
And the mosquito repellent they would have been using would have been DDT.
Yeah.
So,
well, it worked real well. So, wouldn't mind having some myself. But the reality of it is isn't that interesting? On the side of a K ration, a very, very clear message on how to keep your soldiers healthy. I just saw that, thought that was interesting. All right, so Battle of the Bulge, turning point in the war.
Definitely for the Germans. It was their last gasp offensive. After the Battle of the Bulge, they had lost so many trained troops, so much of their remaining Luftwaffe, that they were unable to mount any further major offensives, and it became simply a matter of time before they had surrendered.
You know, we talked early on about resupply, and this comes from personal testimony from my uncles who went all the way until Hitler surrendered. They were in combat from the time they got out of basic training and landed in North Africa until Germany surrendered. But they both were combat engineers, and they ran dozers, of which I got to see one at Fort Leonard Wood Museum just a month or so ago. Went there for a graduation. Little old tiny D4 Caterpillar, you know, about the size of those two tables together, really tiny little things. So that was really personally interesting for me. So I asked Mal Clayton, I said, so what did you do? He was talking about from Italy on. He said, all we did from Italy on was push dead things out of the way. Dead trucks, dead tanks, dead horses, dead people, dead everything. He said everything was dead. When they ran out of fuel, they abandoned it. The vehicle became a dead vehicle. And they'd leave everything right where it quit in the road. So in order for the Allies to move ahead, the engineers had to clear those roadways to let our vehicles through. And that wouldn't have been a very fun job, I don't think. But it was the German army, as they went back home, that was a desperate trip for them, and a tough one for the American army to follow. Okay, what else do we know about the Battle of the Bulge and Dwight David Eisenhower we want to share with our Why Like Ike audience?
The planning behind the Battle of the Bulge is really what showed Eisenhower's genius, almost. Hitler, the plan behind the Battle of the Bulge was simply for Hitler was drive in, split the British and the American lines, force the British into the sea, and have the Allies start infighting so much that they drop out of the war. And that there's no coincidence that where Hitler planned to hit was the northern sector, northern part of the American sector, right before the British, and split right through the 12th Army Group. At the time, within a couple of days of the battle, there was 2 U.S. armies that were actually cut off from communications with Omar Bradley, who was in charge of the 12th Army Group. Eisenhower comes in and he starts making the tough decisions. He takes those 2 armies and turns them over to the British Army, to Bernard Montgomery, which that is a major step because there had already been friction between Montgomery and Bradley and Eisenhower about the conduct of the war. This was exactly what Hitler was hoping for, and instead of there being infighting over who's going to seal up this gap, who's going to take command, Eisenhower steps in and says, we're allies, you're going to take these troops and you're going to fight with them. When we're done, they go back to where they belong. And it showed the resiliency of the Allied nations, the fact that even under such severe pressure, they were able to adjust, adapt, and keep with the primary goal of defeating Germany.
Okay, we got maybe about a minute left, so pretty much means I get to have the last word, and I've got a good one. So your description of that, I want to put a Dwight David Eisenhower spin on it. I really honestly have believed for a long time that this man made decisions that nobody else would make. Just nobody else would make. So not only did he do that, but this is another example of it. He simply made lemonade out of lemons with that decision. You know, there wasn't anything Montgomery had done well other than to talk about jumping out airplanes, you know, but the reality of it was the right decision to make, politically non-expedient one, but it was the right decision to make, and then he supported it. He also sent fuel up there, which made one of his best generals, Mr. Patton, very unhappy, but he supplied Montgomery with what it took to succeed. You know, a lot of people are willing to make decisions, but not supply with what it takes to make it successful. Dwight David Eisenhower he didn't make that mistake, and what a terrific example. Well, the Battle of the Bulge has been a lot of fun for me, even though I was late to the interview. I do apologize, because this is very, very cool stuff. Gentlemen, can we do it again?
Yes.
What's our next battle of what are we going to do?
Looking at the 1956 inauguration.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay.
Different kind of battle, but a battle nonetheless.
Yep, maybe an even bigger one. Well, I really enjoyed Why Like Ike today. I hope you have at home. So, for the staff at the Eisenhower Presidential Library Museum and Boyhood Home, I want to thank you for watching. I'm Dennis Weiss. You have a great day.